In this lecture, we'll learn how to use the core rendering features in Fusion. Rendering in Fusion is a fantastic way to generate high-quality images, and I much prefer it over other CAD softwares, which tend to overcomplicate rendering tools. So to demonstrate this, I'll be using the part that we modeled in the extrusion lecture of the 3D modeling section. So feel free to use this part if you'd like, or you can experiment with any other parts or assemblies that you've modeled. So let's jump into Fusion. And if we look at the tabs at the top on the left-hand side, you'll see that we're currently working in the design environment, which has been the environment we've been working on so far in this course. Let's hit the drop down, and then let's come down to render. Now we enter the rendering environment, which looks very different. We can already see our part there having a different visual appearance. In terms of the render tools, if we come up to the top under the tab render, we'll see we've got the setup tools, the ability to in-canvas render. So that's in this environment here. We can just render without then generating JPEGs or PNGs. And then we've got the final render option here. So today we're going to be taking a look at appearances, the scene setup, decals. We'll take a look at the in-canvas renders and the final render setup as well. So let's start with the setup then. Let's come into appearance. And following on from the materials and appearances lecture that we did, the appearance toolbar is exactly the same as in the design environment. So here we can apply appearances to the body's components or individual faces. Currently in my design, I've got the default steel satin finish, which is associated with the steel material. But I'm going to change that though and come down to my library. I'm going to choose a metal, and I want to choose a aluminium in this case. And we're going to go for aluminium anodized rough blue. We make sure that we've already got that downloaded, which I have. I'm going to left click, drag that across, drop that on the part, and we'll see the change there. We'll then click close. Next in the setup, let's take a look at the scene settings. So there are many options that we have to play with here. We've got the settings, and then the other tab is the environment library. When it comes to the settings, I suggest that you have a play around with these and familiarize yourself with each of the values that we can change. And if you ever want to revert back to the default settings, we've always got the option here at the bottom to restore defaults. So if we do change some of these figures, we can't quite remember what the defaults were, we can just simply click here. So in terms of environment, we've got the brightness. So this is measured in lux. To illustrate what type of lux values might be relevant to the type of scene that you're generating, I'm showing a table here, which is a generic guidance table telling us the according lux values as per the type of scene that we can sort of expect to achieve from there. We've then got the position as well. So here we can position the light. So currently got that on around 75 degrees. We can adjust that like so, and we see the shadow moves around. Put that back to 75. Once we're done with position, make sure that we click off it. We've then got the background. So here I've got a single color gray background. Now, if you want a solid color background, you can adjust it here. So we click and edit. We can adjust this anyhow we want. So we can move the mouse cursor. Let's say here, if we click apply, we've got a very harsh red there. I move over to, let's say, a blue. Go for a, okay, looking nice. But for this one, I'm going to stick with the green. Yeah, something along the lines of this. We've also got the option there as well for environment. So if we select environment, then we come under the environment library. These are the Fusion built-in environments. And if we want to use any of these, let's say field, for example, you can left click and drag it into the environment and then drop it like so. If we pan around, we can then see that we are in a field. But the default is cool light. Okay, and if we come back to settings and we change that to solid color, we'll then revert back to the green that I selected before. Underground, we can include the plane, which will give us a shadow. So for example, it turns the shadow on and off. Got the option to flatten ground and also reflections as well. So where we see this reflection in the ground plane, we can adjust how sharp or kind of blurry or rough that is with this slider here. So if we go all the way up, that's the most rough, and all the way down is the most sharp. I'm going to leave that as 0.1 as the default. Under camera, we've got the options, so just like we did in the design environment for orthographic view, like so, and then perspective being a more kind of realistic 3D appearance. And then there are options for focal length and exposure, which I'm going to leave as the defaults, but feel free to have a play around with those. One thing I will show you about the focal length, let's go back to the environment library. And if I throw the field environment in there, come back to settings, make sure my background is the field setting. If I adjust the focal length, it will also play an effect on the background as well. And in this case, we might want to turn off the reflections. Okay, let's click close. Moving on, we've got the options in this environment to add decals. So if I select that, then need to choose our decal. So if that's in your Fusion projects, you can find your appropriate project in the image there, or you can insert from your computer. I'm going to go ahead and add in my Fusion logo, which is under my Fusion course project. Click insert. Let's go for this face here. Okay, that's looking quite interesting. One option we do have in this environment is to use in-canvas renders. So we don't have to perform a complete render, but we can look at a in-canvas render, which is essentially a preview. If I click in-canvas render, and if we move down to the bottom right, you'll see here that we've got options to adjust this slider here. I can adjust it in any direction. Here is referred to as an excellent render, which is so many iterations that will give us an excellent render, supposedly. We then got the final render, which I believe is 100 iterations, and then infinite. So infinite is when we would then later pause once we're happy with the number of iterations upon that part. Now this is being done locally, so your graphics card, your processing unit is processing each of these iterations. So depending on your hardware, this would determine how long the render takes. I've just got this going at excellent quality at the minute, got this background, the settings that we set in the scene setup, and this part here with the logo. And that's looking okay as an in-canvas render. Just one thing I would advise here, because it's in-canvas, we can actually rotate this and continue to work with it. I would suggest that if you are doing that, to turn off the in-canvas render. And by doing so, we're not asking too much out of our PC, and also it's not necessary for when we're adjusting parts and such. Also, under the in-canvas render, we've got options to adjust some of the settings there, and we've also got the option to capture image as well, and we can save that locally. And then finally, we've got the option to render. If we select this, so there are some presets here in a mobile web print video, but in this case, I'm going to go for custom. My image size, I'm going to leave that as a 16:9 ratio, 1 megapixel. Leave the exposure as default, and the file format I typically do as JPEG. But if you do a PNG, you can make the background transparent. I'm going to leave that as JPEG. I want to have the background in there. And under the renderer, we can do this either in the Autodesk cloud, or we can do it locally, so on our PC. Doing this in the cloud is a good option. However, it requires us to use cloud credits. And depending on your license type, you might have limits here. And to be honest, I don't notice any particular difference in render time compared to running it locally. But again, it would depend on your PC and what you're doing at the time. So I'm going to go on a local render, make sure we've got the advanced settings open. And then under here, we can adjust this slider. So the number here represents the number of iterations. So a draft would be 25, standard 50 iterations, final 75, and then excellent quality would be 100. For a final output render, I would always recommend either final or excellent. In this case, I'm going to go with final, and then let's click render. When the render begins, it will appear in the bottom left here in our rendering gallery. If we hover the mouse over it, it will tell us some details, like how long it will take, the image size, render quality. And once that's complete, it will then show, and then we can go ahead and save that image. And then our render is complete, and that's, I think that's looking okay, quite happy with that. And if we come up to the top here, we've got the option to download, and then we can download that locally and make sure we got the right file type selected. So in this case, we rendered as a JPEG, so we've got to type JPEG, click save. And there we have our final render output. So that's an overview of the rendering capabilities within Fusion. If you are rendering regularly, I strongly suggest that you have a good study of the parameters that you can adjust in the scene settings. And I look forward to seeing the renders you produce in the future. And I will see you in the next lecture.